got a suitcase of guilt. You've got a sack of discontentment. You've got a duffel bag of weariness on the shoulder. You've got a hanging bag of grief on the other. Add on a backpack of doubt, an overnight bag of loneliness, and a trunk of fear. The loneliness bag, at least, is filled with emptiness. And so you're just carrying around this bag, and it's just on your shoulder. It doesn't have anything in it. And that's what is so defeating about it.
I'll preface this by saying I so appreciate coming onto this podcast and being able to talk to you guys, because a lot of what I say on here is like I'm saying it to myself.
Before we can ever move forward, we do need to examine ourselves and say, what am I carrying that's going to weigh me down? And so God is saying to us, set the burden down. You are carrying burdens you're not supposed to bear. Welcome back to the Life and Faith Podcast. So happy that you're joining us here today. We're going to talk about a great topic of study, primarily one that is found in Psalm 23. Before we dive into that, though, I want to just, by way of introduction, go around here. We've got our guest host here, Cody, with us, and then also Dan, as always. And I'd like to ask you guys, when you travel anywhere, and let's add this here on this question, because I think this will be fun. Let me know, when you travel somewhere, do you pack heavy or light? Are you a heavy packer or a light packer? And then what about your spouse? Also inform me about your spouse.
Oh yeah. Well, I think my wife is a little bit more heavy packer because she likes the amenities of life. You know, like if we're camping, I'm less inclined to do that, but she likes to have it be kind of like taking home with you where you go. But, you know, I don't know if I'm a light packer per se, okay, but I would enjoy traveling a little more if I could just pack everything in one backpack. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I'll just figure it out when I get there.
So you prefer to be light, but maybe it doesn't always work out.
Doesn't always work out that way because you do need things like bedding and stuff like that. But
sure.
I know we go to men's retreat every year.
Well, would you say that you pack the essentials, or do you pack like extra in case?
I love the idea of just having the essentials. Mm-hmm. Like I'll make the example of men's retreat because I will pack enough clothes to what I think is to get me through, and my wife she'll be like, I'll fix this, and then she'll throw in like all this extra stuff, and I always appreciate it when it's there, but I'm not a two bag.
Some of it.
I'm not a two bag person. I want one, and
sure.
We have to take bedding, so it'll be like bedding, snacks, and enough clothes. But then she'll always like overdo it. Like, well, what if your pants get wet, or what if you need a towel, or you need this, you need that? And it's like, no, I'll come back and be fine when I get home. But she's more the overpacker. Like she likes to have the really nice stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely a backpack kind of guy.
Okay.
Definitely a backpack kind of guy. I'll take pretty much exactly the amount of clothes that I need. I'll throw in some extra socks and boxers and stuff like that. My wife, on the other hand, who knows what outfit she wants to wear? It might not suit her mood that night. You have to prepare for the weather. So I'm a backpack guy. She's a where's the biggest suitcase in the house kind of girl.
Yeah. It's funny that you guys say that because the dynamic is actually kind of flipped between my wife and I, to where she's like bare minimum, like let's just get out the door and let's go. And I'm stretching this a little bit into like just the everyday life, not necessarily just traveling like a long distance. But I would be more so of like, oh, I forgot this. I need to go and make sure I need to be prepared, right? Like that's at least how I soothe my own conscience of overpacking is I want to be prepared. So it's less like I think what you were saying, and maybe let's give Sheila the benefit of a doubt and say that she's just trying to be prepared too.
I will say I've appreciated it because there have been times when, I was glad that she did the packing because I had something I needed or something I completely forgot about or whatever, It's just that's not how I...
Yeah. There's for sure been times where we've gone somewhere and my wife is like, oh, I left this at home. And then there's been other times where she's like, oh, I left this at home. And then I like pull it out of my pocket, like, I got it.
Yeah.
So And then I've had a situation too before where I've asked somebody in my family, like we were all doing like kind of a traveling thing where we traveled an hour away to something, and it was we had been there a while. We had made a day of it, and I was asking the whole family kind of pitch in on this thing that we were all going to do together. It was online, and you had to like fill out a form and stuff like that, and they were kind of like on the fence about it. My sister-in-law specifically, and then she was like, "Well, my battery's almost dead." And I, like, without missing a beat, I pull out my portable charger, and I was like, "Well, here you go." And she was like dumbfounded. Everybody just burst out laughing because they were like, "Did you plan this way?" I was like, "Nope. I came prepared. Like I thought my battery would probably be low, and I brought this for my phone." So that's kind of like the difference between my wife and I. She's a light packer. She wants to get there with as little bags as possible, and I'm like, maybe. So I wouldn't say I'm a heavy packer, but I'd like to be somewhere in between. But yeah, it would be nice to be a light packer in some cases, but I can't do the light packing thing. Anyway, that was kind of an introductory way of getting into the subject, because while we're talking about like physical bags that we're traveling somewhere with, as we're traveling on this journey of life, we may pick up a lot of baggage that isn't necessarily like, the physical bags, but more of like these ideas or these burdens that weigh us down. They're not bags that we grab made of leather or whatever material that they make suitcases out of these days, but they're made of burdens. You've got the suitcase of guilt. You've got a sack of discontentment. You've got a duffel bag of weariness on the shoulder. You've got a hanging bag of grief on the other. Add on a backpack of doubt, an overnight bag of loneliness, and a trunk of fear, and really of the one that's, let's see, what was the most recent one that I covered? It's somewhere along the lines of worry or fear, anxiety. A lot of times the loneliness bag, at least, is filled with emptiness. And so you're just carrying around this bag, and it's just on your shoulder. It doesn't have anything in it, and that's what is so defeating about it. But no wonder we're tired at the end of the day, because much like if you've ever been to an airport and you see somebody that's packed like a pack mule, and they're just lugging around these things, and you're like, that's probably their first time flying, because they didn't know how much walking they'd have to do from one terminal to the next. But really, it's all our first time living, right? We've never lived before. So we tend to carry around these burdens on our back, and we end up. I'll ask you guys this, because I know my answer here. Have you ever just woken up tired, like from the get-go?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know many people are like, I can't even function until I've had my coffee, and I get that, and I feel that. But yeah, there's some days it's like, did I even get any rest? And so, out of all the bags that I know I kind of rattled them off in a rapid succession there, but was there any bag that stood out to you that's like, yeah, that's a baggage that I carry around?
Well, I will say that I feel that most on Sunday night, because we tend to pack our weekends with stuff. Mm-hmm. Like this weekend,
catches up with you then.
Yeah, like this weekend, for example, my wife actually has had an unrelated matter go on that's basically taken up her whole week, and then she comes home to sleep. She gets up, she goes back to deal with these couple of situations. And then the weekend comes, and we're podcasting, right? Mm. So now here's this time that I didn't know that was going to happen. So now after we get out of here, I'll have something going on. Tomorrow's Sunday, which comes with all of the things that Sunday comes with. And by Sunday night, I'll have had a couple hours, because all the stuff that we feel all this, like, I want to say responsibility, obligation, responsibility. You're talking about spiritual burdens, and I would say, like, this is one of those. Like, it kind of comes
Absolutely.
It comes into the realm of fear, I guess you'd say. It all boils back down to the fear of, like,
there's a little bit of guilt involved there too. Like, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for you, but I know sometimes I burden myself with so much packed in the week. So I'm like, if I say no to this, I say no to that, that person, I'll feel guilty. Yeah.
I'll preface this by saying I so appreciate coming onto this podcast and being able to talk to you guys, because a lot of what I say on here is like I'm saying it to myself, because we did the episode regarding mindset, and of course I'm not perfect at that. Of course I have my days where I struggle with self-doubt, and I'm not taking the action steps that are necessary to get me to where I want to get to. One of the different baggage ideas that you mentioned was like worry and fear, kind of conflating those two. But I get that a lot in terms of finances, where it's like, I'm just starting a new career, and it's like, okay, how do I get to this next level? Or how, I'm constantly thinking about this, and it's like, so a lot of what I'm saying here is like I'm speaking to myself and like
Sure.
trying to give
Same.
myself guidance and set myself on. I'm sure my wife listens to this and you're like, who are you even?
Yeah.
Who is this guy? It's like,
Yeah, it's funny when we did that episode and you were going through those things. You did the first one, I go, that's kind of me, and you did the second one, I go, I fall into that category, and then you did the third one, I go, that's definitely me.
Yeah, you're like,
And then-
oh, that's more me.
And it's just like ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
and so it's like, I'm not speaking from any position of authority. These are just ideas that I've heard, stuff that I've been able to internalize, and stuff that I struggle every day with actually implementing in my own life.
Absolutely.
I fall short every day, and it's like I don't want to be boastful and pretend like I'm this master of mindset, or like I'm burden free because I follow the Lord so diligently. I struggle as a person, and so that's why it's so refreshing to come on here, because it's definitely a reset of my state of mind and of my journey in faith, where it's like, okay, you talk a big game, now it's time to follow through. It's like put up or shut up. You got to do the things that practice what you preach. You know what I mean? You can't just be speaking on these things and then not live that out in your own life. So,
Yeah.
but those are I think the biggest ones for me are kind of the fear and worry, and I think guilt is kind of downstream of that, because I know I shouldn't be thinking that way, or I know that I shouldn't be experiencing those. So you feel the guilt because you aren't on the path that you'd like to see yourself on.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because you'll say it, and then you'll find yourself saying, I'm afraid that, and then fill in the blank. Like I know where my hope is found, right? But I'm afraid that I'll have a life that I wasn't happy with, or that I'll have regrets, that I missed an opportunity at this time to make a change that I could have made now that would have made my life better down the road, like I did in my 20s when I just ignored everything and lived however I
Right, yeah.
and then got to my 40s and was like, huh, oh, this is twice as hard as it has to be, or more,
Yeah.
So it's like I know where my hope is, but I also like I hold that fear in that other hand, and that baggage of like regret.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Like you made a good point about the regrets that you look back. We don't know. Like this is where your mind can go, right? You can say, "Well, I have so many regrets about what I did in the past decade. What is next decade going to hold? Where I'm going to be regretting about what I'm doing right now?" And that's not a good way to think about it. A good way to the opposite way to think about it is, by God's grace, I'm going to continue to grow in this decade and learn more than I did the last decade. And just learn from your mistakes and go. Like the Bible says, a just man falls down 7 times, but he gets back up again. And that's what's important. Like that's what alleviates some of those guilt things. I'm getting a little bit ahead here, but essentially that's a good setting the tone for what we're talking about here. Can either one of you think of one of these subjects that we're talking about and say, I have been able to, by God's grace, leave that behind? I think I would say, kind of along the lines of what Cody said, it's a work in progress, right? Like I have what used to be really hindering me in burdening me down. I carry that bag a lot less than I used to, and maybe specifically for discontentment, maybe specifically for guilt. The Lord's been working in my heart a lot over the last year of this idea of the fear of man and not letting that weigh me down, because that can come with guilt and all kinds of things to weigh you down, because the Bible literally says in Proverbs that the fear of man brings a snare. That means you're trapped. It traps you makes you feel like you can't do anything. But is there any specific that you feel like you've had victory over?
Well, I would say in certain areas of life, I've had victory over certain things. You know what I mean? I don't think getting back to the mindset thing, I don't think I fall into, I can't very often.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't. It just won't happen for me. I've left a lot of that behind.
That's good.
But in about every area, there's some challenge. It's like I definitely have not conquered self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, definitely have fear about money. That's probably my biggest. I think I talked about this maybe.
The
with
what
you.
ifs.
The what ifs.
of
Or
life.
like, just saying, hey, I'm faithful. No question about that. It's just how is he going to do it, and how is he going to? Am I going to have? Is it him or is it me? Is it him telling me that I need to make this change?
That's
or is it
huge.
me
Yep.
going, if I don't make this change, God's not going to come through for me?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? There's a little bit of there's a slight difference there where money is concerned. So for those reasons, and then like regrets about what I've done in the past. You know, I will often say, I don't regret how things worked out,
Sure.
right? But I would have done this differently.
Yeah.
You know, my son just turned 18, and we were talking about, hey, I don't regret how things worked out, but there was a time in my life when I didn't have a wife and a kid, and I squandered an opportunity there, you know, and he's in that spot now, and I'm trying to tell him, like, do something you care about, you know, so
That's good.
there different areas have different levels of those different things, but there are some things that I've done better with.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I've definitely had victories in a plurality of those, but in all of those, I still feel that I'm not where I would like to be, and I feel like I still falter pretty consistently in a lot of those areas. So it's one of those things where I have a lot of humility, but at the same time, I can give myself praise in some of the successes I have had.
It's huge. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas in which I feel I need improvement. So it's something that requires that consistent effort in order to try to overcome these things. And obviously, none of us will ever be perfect and be able to give up this, what weighs us down. But we can kind of work to be better each day, pushing through that. So that's where I'm at now. Is I've had some victories. I'm not where I want to be, so I'm in the pursuit of achieving more in those different areas, overcoming the fear, the worry, the anxiety, the guilt, doing better by God and better by, as an extension, my family and my community and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been perpetually taxiing up the runway for 20 years. I feel like there's multiple moments, basically daily, where I felt like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to reevaluate the situation. I'm going to grab the bull by the horns. You know, I'm going to plan this out a little better. I'm going to be more prepared for this in the future. I'm going to change this thing now. Now is the time. And I feel like I've been there, you know, in that reevaluation place for, no kidding, since, you know, 04, at least 04, 05. I was 24 at that time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A time when you should reevaluate things, you know.
Yeah.
And really, I think you should be in a constant state of reevaluation.
Right. Yeah.
But sometimes I wish, like, I could just finally let go of all that crap and just be comfortable in who I am now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I really don't have that right now. You know what I mean? Or
Sure.
I haven't yet.
Yeah.
So still waiting to not be fearful of these things and to not be you know what I mean? For that to just say, I guess you could call it finding yourself or whatever. I think I've been constantly trying to figure out who I am over those many years, you know.
Sure. Yeah. It's kind of a journey that every human goes on. And
do they all go on it? Because I feel like I'm the only one.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you guys being so candid with your answers, because this is really what we're talking about, is the bread and butter of, if we're talking about a life in faith, we can't talk about life without also talking about what burdens us down, what we carry through life. And it's just a natural thing to pick up these bags along the way, and before we know it, and sometimes we're not even aware of how much we're carrying or how long we've been carrying it, and we realize, no, this is significantly weighing me down. And sometimes you don't fully realize how much you were weighed down until you let go of it. And again, we've kind of a little bit touched on this, but I want to double down on it. We don't just simply let go of a bag and say, I'm done with it for the rest of my life. I'm never going to pick up that bag again. No, it's a daily watchfulness. Like, okay, I think I'm picking this back up. I need to be careful and lay it down before the Lord, because what we're really driving home at here today in this episode is there's so much to do in this life of faith. God didn't just simply save you and take you home immediately when you got saved by faith. He meant you to live out a life of faith after that point. And why? I mean, number one, for his glory, but number two, also to the testimony before others. And because there's a lost and dying world that still needs to hear about him. And he has made it so that he said, ye are disciples, right? And he sent us out. So before we can ever move forward, we do need to examine ourselves and say, what am I carrying that's going to weigh me down? And so God is saying to us, set the burden down. You are carrying burdens you're not supposed to bear. A lot of times I hear it put this way, you need to be about releasing burdens that you were never intended to bear. Why do you think that we carry around burdens that we don't need to bear? Like what keeps us from setting those burdens down?
Well, I guess it would be your nature, right? Because we would want to believe that we could pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and solve our problems.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Yep. So maybe that, just, I guess pride is the word, but
I think pride is a really good word for it. Or desire to control, I think, is something that plays an aspect in that. It's like we kind of take on the burden for ourselves instead of giving that over. It's something I struggle with is like, I've been talking about it in the last couple episodes. I think this episode too, I mentioned it, is like the worry or provision or providing for the family, things of that nature. It's like I am shouldering this responsibility that's not mine to shoulder. It's like, yes, I have to take the action to get to the place that I desire to be at, but God has promised to provide for us all that you need. And it's like, okay, maybe I need to reassess, what is it that I need? What am I doing? What is my why? Address what is my desire for pursuing these things. Is it to fill my own ego or to fulfill my own desires, or is it something that will serve God and his purpose? And it's like, at a certain point, you have to assess where you are, where you want to be, and then you have to really think, okay, if I were in this position where I want to be, what would my day-to-day look like? That's something that I struggle with, because it's like, okay, I have this desire to be in a certain position, whether that be financially or spiritually, or even in terms of just like your physical fitness and health. You have this desire and mental image of where you would like to be, but you're living your day-to-day as if you want to be where you're at.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't make any change, you won't get any change.
The day-to-day has to change.
The day-to-day has to change. It's like, okay, if you want to be a physically fit person, what does a physically fit person do every day? 5 or 6 days a week, they're working out. Every single day, they're monitoring their diet. They're doing things that will push the needle. You're progressively overloading. You're doing cardio a couple times a week, et cetera, et cetera. And this can be, adjusted for each of those aspects of life. If I want to have a really healthy relationship with my children, what does that look like? What do I do every day? Do I have set time where I only spend with them, where I'm not distracted by your phone, or you guys are actually spending the quality time instead of just, let's watch a movie together? It's like the active player, going out. You have an older son, doing something that's kind of like a one-on-one time with him, things like that. It's like, you're not going to become what you want to become if you're not changing who you are now.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm really like, again, this podcast is so great because it makes me look at my own life and assess like, okay, we got to make some changes. You know who you want to be. How do you get there? And kind of work backwards from that.
Right. Yep. And think about this too, when we were talking about burdens, there's a specific thing that when the Bible is referring to trusting God with our burdens, There's specific way we go about doing that. But also, the Bible calls us to bear one another's burdens. How am I ever going to do that for Dan, for example, if I am so encumbered and doubled over even sometimes in life with my own burdens? Now, that shouldn't necessarily be my driving force to getting rid of those burdens. It should really be my relationship to God necessitates that I examine myself and get rid of these burdens, because it's not his intention. I should desire to live the life that was always intended. What was it that you always point out, Dan, like the righteous life that God intended?
The righteous life that God desires.
Right, which is absolutely, we often talk about that phrase in the sense of we need to bring on these things, but it absolutely does not involve some of these other things we just talked about, like all these duffel bags of worry and guilt.
It definitely
and all
does
that kind of
not.
stuff. Right. So being encumbered about like that is, and I just went over this with the church on Wednesday, but there's this idea of the picture of Mary and Martha, right? Where Martha, Jesus says, you are burdened about with much serving, and she's like, because she finally comes in and she's like, don't you think Mary ought to be helping me? Like,
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah. I'm over here toiling away, and she's,
Yeah. And so his assessment on Mary is this beautiful depiction. Like, there's nothing wrong with being busy, but he was pointing out that Mary has found that one needful thing, and Mary is prioritizing listening to the Lord over all these things that need to get done. Jesus wasn't saying that what you're doing is wrong. What she was doing was needful, but the most needful thing, never forget that. And so sometimes when we're so encumbered about with all these things, we need to realize that these are actually distracting me from listening to the Lord like I should be. So with all that said, let's listen to the Lord in the verses that David wrote in Psalm 23. And before I read this, I want to preface this. I should preface every verse like this, but I'm going to do it here for sure. Sometimes the most familiar verses are the most dangerous to us because we know them by memory. Maybe you have this whole chapter memorized, but I challenge you to read this again. Not just hearing me on this podcast, but go and open your Bible and read it, whatever you have, and read it for yourself. And understand that every word in this chapter will preach. Every word by itself. And that's how you say, oh, it's only 6 verses, but there's so much packed into here and so much that applies to the burdens of life. So as I read this, keep that in mind. And I'm going to try to emphasize each part here. In verse 1, it says, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There's a lot of good stuff in the middle, and like I said, every word here will preach. But I want to break it down to just this, because this is what I want to focus on for this episode. The Lord is my shepherd. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Him being our shepherd. That's all we need. And it is the moments where we bring around all these baggages that we've lost sight of that. We've lost sight that he's our shepherd. He's our shepherd, yes, but he doesn't necessarily, beat us into submission or anything like that. He's patient. He's long-suffering. The Bible talks about that. And we think, I shall not want. I will not have desires. I will not need things because he will be all that I need. And really, everything else in the chapter hangs on that right there. Like, it's all just embellishing of, because the Lord is my shepherd, I can walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Because the Lord is my shepherd, he restores my soul. Because the Lord is my shepherd, all these things. So, do either one of you know, and to be fair, I didn't know this either. I had to look this up for this. So this is something I'm just finding out. But what point of David's life did he write this psalm?
That I do not know. No.
So I thought he's writing this probably as he's sitting down in a green pasture with his sheep somewhere. But I actually found out that historically there is evidence to prove that he wrote this in the waning years of his life. And it's crazy to me to think of all that he went through what probably 10 of us have gone through combined, because he had Saul after his life. He was on the run constantly. He slayed a giant. He had all these mighty wars that he fought. He went through all this tragedy with his sons and his children and all this grief that he went through. But at the very end of it, what did he go back to? He went back to his early years, his shepherding years. And he thought, man, the Lord set me up for the perfect foundation here because he is my shepherd. All those years when I was shepherding, taking care of the sheep. So not only is it an acknowledgement when we read this and say the Lord is my shepherd, in that same sentence when you say that, you're acknowledging, I'm just a sheep. I'm the sheep. The Bible says we are the sheep of his pasture, right? Now, there was a little girl who tried to memorize this verse, and she said it this way. She quoted, "The Lord is my shepherd," and she couldn't remember the last part. She goes, "I've got all I want." And it's like, well, technically you're wrong, but you're also right. Like, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, right.
And then, so what leaps into your mind when you hear this psalm read? Maybe it's a memory in your past, or maybe it's the visual imagery it creates. I'm curious, what do you guys picture when you hear this psalm?
So one of our missions that we support at our church is the Forge. A good friend of the church, Kevin Green, he does this men's advance, we call it, because men don't retreat. That's the phrasing of it. It's a great thing because he has an actual forge that we all come together and we'll forge like a knife or an axe or something like that, which is the imagery parallel of, you have to forge yourself to be the man that God wants you to be. I had for just a brief time a small business that we had set up with him. It was Vanquish the Valley was the name of the business, inspired by Psalm 23. And so my mind immediately goes to, that whenever I think of Psalm 23, I think of that part of the chapter, which is, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil." And it's, this idea that you were never promised an easy life or a peaceful life, but you can take solace in knowing that God is with you. He wants what's best for you. The imagery of like making you lie down in green pastures and walking beside still waters. So it's like, yes, in this life we will have trouble. In this world you will have trouble. Take heart, I've overcome the world. So I love that very sharp contrast in this chapter of, you're going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but you can take heart in knowing that God is with you. He's beside you. He is able to lead you and give you that peace. So that's immediately what I think of.
My answer's not as good as that. So no, I'd say the imagery, probably just the imagery, that would really be it.
Yeah.
I also think about the valley of the shadow of death as, by the way, that's still true today. Mm-hmm. You're still walking in the valley of the shadow of death. Yep. This is that. This is that. This is not.
There's sometimes, I would say that there's sometimes in life we're more aware of it, but we always are in it, right?
Always are in it.
Yeah.
And it really is like, this is not life. This is a result of the fall.
Yeah. Shrouded in death, which was never meant to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go, and then I'll have like maybe a couple more questions at the end, but I want to go into some more scripture here, and specifically what Jesus said, because Jesus essentially, I believe this was on his mind, this what we just read in Psalm 23 when he spoke these words in Matthew 11:28, where he said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He's the great shepherd,
Yeah.
and he acknowledges that the sheep know my voice and they hear me. And he says in verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls." Some people get hung up on the old English style that's here, but really, I love at least the word "shall," because shall initially was supposed to be a little stronger than will. And so I don't think you have to have it in there. I'm not trying to make some kind of theological statement here, but I do appreciate the use of "shall," because he's like, you shall, if you take my yoke upon you, like you're labored about, you're encumbered about with much serving, but if you'll serve for me ultimately and not other people, but you're, in so doing, you are going to be serving people. But if you do it for him and his yoke, then you will have rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And that goes all the way back to that first question I asked, like, how do we travel? It's less about, I was doing it just more for fun, entertainment purposes, but spiritually speaking, are you traveling light? Because his burden is light, and that's the way he wants us to travel. 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. That's we were talking about, I think, in the last podcast about it's not just speaking the truth to people, it's how you go about doing that. And every person, before you go and talk to them about Christ, I think this is a great way to start it. Is talk about how the Lord is our shepherd and he cares for us, and we can cast all our cares on. Essentially what he's saying is, this says casting all your cares, but essentially what we're saying here is casting all your burdens. The burdens you're carrying around, cast them on him, because he cares for you. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was struggling with my future and what if I was going to find anybody to marry and all these things. I was really going to my dad one time, exasperated about all these things about my future. And he said something that was so comforting to me in that point. And I know why it works so well. It's because it's what he was comforted at the same time when he was my age and worried about similar things. He said, as much as you're telling me how much you're concerned about those things and what will happen, know that God is even more concerned about those things in your life than even you are. And do you not think it's almost like that I think you were referencing this, Cody, in another episode of like, take no thought, because, and he goes to that series of like, look at the lilies. Mm-hmm. The lilies don't clothe themselves, they don't toil or spin, but yet they're clothed
King
better
Solomon
than all of
was
Solomon.
Not adorned such as they, and look at the birds of the sky; they neither sow nor reap, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more significance than the birds?
Yeah, that's great.
I love that section. I think it's Matthew chapter 6, in the 20s, like verse 24. I think is where it starts. That portion of the Sermon on the Mount, and that was the most, I think, significant verse when I first started getting into the faith and started getting into the scripture, because that's always been a worry, a struggle of mine, is worrying about the future, worrying about where money will come from or where I'm going to be down the line. And that gives you such peace to know God knows that you need these things. Yeah. He knows, and he will provide them. He will provide, he will make sure you have what you need in order to live a full life. You have to trust in him. I love this saying where it's worry is faith and fear. If you pray and then you continue worrying, you're saying with your mouth that I trust in God, but you're saying with your action that
you're wavering in your actions.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So that worry is faith and fear. You're placing your faith in the unknown versus in the knowable provision of God, that he cares for you, that he's willing to provide what you need as long as you will trust in him to do that.
Yeah, it's great. This kind of leads me to, when we're thinking about how we need that help from the shepherd, it leads me to think about the sheep. You were talking, Dan, you just kind of see the imagery, which is perfectly fine. That's I think the way he wants us to see those things is the imagery. Christ spoke in imagery all the time in parables because he wanted to open our understanding of things. But really examine this idea of sheep. Have either of you guys, and I'll ask this to the listeners, of course you won't be able to answer here, but I want you to think about this. Have you ever seen a sheep before? Have you ever spent any time around sheep?
Not really. I mean, I've seen them, but not like never cared for one or anything.
Yeah, same.
I very little time around sheep. There was a brief time where every once in a while when the sheep at a certain farm needed their feet trimmed, I would go there with my wife. Her and I were dating at the time, and she brought me so that I could go run and catch these things and flip them over, and she could trim them. But it was kind of a task because they're the only thing that they're really fast, and they don't want you to capture them. But the one saving grace is how they're just not very smart, right? They can't take care of themselves, and even just what we were doing with their feet, like it shows like they need help, and they will actually it's one of the very few animals that could never really survive out in the wild because they've had sheep that have gotten lost before, and it doesn't take long. They'll do something like they'll fall into creeks, and then because they don't have anybody to shave their wool, the wool will be so wet and heavy they'll drown. They'll easily drown, and they're the type of animal that absolutely, it's like God created them for the purpose of being taken care of by shepherds. Like that's really the only way you can look at it. And the more you go into sheep and how just they're such dumb creatures, and they need calm waters. They need to feel safe. They will actually they won't eat typically until they're ready to lay down. And remember how it talks about how he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Sheep need to feel, they always they don't have any natural defenses of their own, so they need to feel like everything's fine around them. If there's one little agitating thing like water that's moving too quickly, or they hear predators, they have to feel 100% safe, and they'll go long periods of time without eating because they just don't feel safe. But once the shepherd can make them feel safe and they finally lie down, they find, they don't have any of these natural instincts of how to defend themselves. They don't have even a sense of direction. But how many of us, like those sheep, we get swept away, like in that creek I was talking about, and weighed down by the world. We get swept away into things. That's essentially the main idea behind what you last talked about in that last episode we recorded, Dan, was getting swept up in all this stuff that's going on around us, and then pretty soon we're reacting and doing things to hurt people around us.
Saying things we shouldn't. And
right, and it's this idea of getting swept away. So here's kind of a closing challenge, if you will, to the listener. As you're thinking about these things, and I'd like to parse these out to talk about these individual burdens, because this was just really a high-level overview. So maybe some other time I can record hone in on those specific burdens we deal with more individually. But as an overview, I would like to challenge all of our listeners, every one of us, to set aside at least a half an hour. You say, wow, I've never prayed that much before. Half an hour for prayer, to ask the Lord to reveal the burdens that you are bearing day by day. Which ones do you need to lay down? Because all those burdens we're talking about here today were never his intention. So which ones are you carrying around? And then also keep a piece of paper in hand. There's no harm in doing this. I think we do a disservice to ourselves when we're just praying and it's a constant monologue and we don't. Make sure you take time to reflect in your prayer. Stop talking. Reflect, listen for the Holy Spirit, but also keep a paper and pen around, and then write down the burdens the Lord brings to your mind, and write down what you think you're struggling with the most, what issues you pick up from time to time, and pray that God would help you to show you how to release those burdens, how to surrender them over to Him daily, and then pray for those around you. You can pray for your family, you can pray for fellow church members, your friends, but specifically pray that God would reduce your burdens in your life so that you can help others. But ask Him to reveal them not only to you, but also to ask Him to reveal them directly to those people, but also allow you the opportunity to help them with their burdens as well. Because like I said, that's what God commissions us to do as the church, is to bear one another's burdens. So what burdens are you are your loved ones needlessly bearing? What burdens are you needlessly bearing? And what can you do to help them lay down those unnecessary burdens? What is God speaking to you today? Thank you for listening to the Life and Faith podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review on your favorite platform, and sharing it with friends and family. Your support helps us continue spreading the gospel of faith, hope, and love. Connect with us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others to stay updated on our latest episodes. See the link in the show notes for all our social media channels. And until next time, it is our hope you'll commit yourself to an even deeper life in faith.